Good morning. Good morning. How the devil are you doing this fine day? Hope you're all fit and well. Yes, I am wearing another vintage Caterpillar hat, again, courtesy of Mr. Dan Cullen. I don't know where you did your shopping, Dan, but I approve enormously. This is another one of the hats that he bought all the way from the US of A. I do think if you're going to get yourself a vintage cat hat, it probably needs to be from America. I'd say exactly the same about John Deere as well. Go shopping in America, I would say. And by the sound of it, it doesn't feel like the cost was too exorbitant. Let's have a look. Go over to Dan can probably tell you more about that. I know Dan and Gary are here. Mark Whiting is here to give us permission to begin. Andy Darvell says, morning, morning, morning. Busy site this morning, rigging the piling rig, ready to pre-auger the ground ahead of sheep piles going in tomorrow. Right up against the clock, as it always is. Oliver Gundish just said cat hat over on Instagram. Yeah, it's a fine specimen. I think you'll agree. I'd love to know the vintage. It's kind of got an old feel to it, and I'm all about that. I think that's a fantastic thing. Mick Norton is in our midst. Mick, I'm sorry, I did see your message about Blue Peter. I didn't have a chance to respond, but I did. Despite your frustrations, I was greatly entertained by your story. Thank you very much indeed for that. Jim Turner is in our midst as well. I'm not going to say we've got loads to get through. You probably know that by now. I am going to be talking later in the show about loneliness. Yeah. My biggest fear, in absolute truth, which is half the reason I'm talking about it. I keep thinking this industry discussion about all things mental health related sometimes is a little too broad. It's very easy to say, mental health, and I'm sure there's some validity to that argument. But I want to look at one of the very specific causes, effects, symptoms of that wider thing, which I'll be doing later today. Oliver Gundy has just said, any vintage hat ideas and where to get them? Dan, do you remember the name of the website or the, was it an eBay job? I don't know. I honestly don't know, but if I can find out for you, Oliver, I will certainly let you know. But this is the one I'm wearing today, obviously, because you can see it on my head. That's the one I was wearing yesterday. Bit of a toss-up, isn't it? Yeah, a bit of a toss-up, but I think I prefer the brown one, but I do think this does. I can't wait for the summer to roll around. Yellow hat in the summer? Absolutely. Yes, apparently Dan Cullen was on eBay USA. That's where he found him. Peter McKenna, racing up the pop charts as he is, has taken time to hang out with his old friends. He's probably looking down upon us now, while he's counting his royalty millions. But Peter McKenna is here, and very welcome he is too. All the more important though. How's your health, mate? Never mind all the pop stuff. See, this is why we have differences of opinion. Demo Dove, Andy Dalvell says, like the brown one more. Peter McKenna, however, says the brown one looks too much like toilet droppings. If you're crapping hats, mate, you probably need to see a doctor pretty damn quick, I would say. And he's on the mend. Glad to hear it. Peter, keep on that road to recovery. Let's get you back to full strength because the trucking world needs you, my friend. As I say, I'm not going to say we've got loads to get through. Just take that as read because we always have. So without further ado, I'm going to roll the out. I best roll the intro before I roll the outro. That's the way these things normally work. I'm going to roll the intro and get this show on the road. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of December. Can you believe it? Welcome to the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony, the Walrus of Demolition, the Lord High Chancellor of live streaming. In today's show, 50 years as chairman, Lord Bamford looks back over half a century at the tiller of JCB. Wacker Neuson unveils its latest electric minis. The sound of Engcon I'll explain that when we get there. And here's a thing I never thought I'd say: using your mini excavator as a battery pack. Because, why wouldn't you? And I've already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again in today's morning monologue. The loneliness of the construction worker, the loneliness of the long distance construction worker, or demolition worker, or truck driver for that matter, given that Peter's here. We'll get to all of that in just a moment, but we're going to. I think we need to start with a bit of Caterpillar action, and then we'll go over to JCB to hear from Lord Bamford himself. Dan Cullen, it's called taste. I know my caps. You certainly do. You've got enough of them. Peter says, I've just rolled the intro for you as my phone disappeared off my legs. I'll very quickly tell you a story. Not this one. This is the first phone I've ever actually put a case on, but that's beside the point. But I had, do you remember when the iPhone went shiny and slightly rounded back? Do you remember that? I had mine in white. I can't remember what they called it, but I had mine in white. For quite some time, I had a fishing game on there. So, you'd cast and then you'd sit there and your float would bob up and down and then, the float would go under and you had to strike. I was sat there outside my son's school once, waiting for my other half to emerge. Me and Fred were in the car, waiting for the missus to emerge, and I was playing the game. Went like that, threw the phone into the back of the car. Didn't do that anymore. Gary Muirhead, still like the very old vintage cat logo. I wonder if you could actually track down a baseball cap with the old baseball cap, the old Caterpillar logo in it. I think I mentioned this a little while ago. I was, when was I there? I was in Japan in 2019. Excuse me, something in my eye. Yeah, back in 2019, I was there, and I picked up some goodies while I was there. But one of the things that I was given was at the Caterpillar factory where they were making some of the excavators. I was given a royal blue Caterpillar hat, but the word cat was in like a Japanese script. And I wore it, and a guy that I kind of know on Instagram sent a comment saying, "Absolutely fantastic! Wish I could get one of those hats." And I thought, being generous, I'll send it to him. So I sent it to him. Never heard back from him, so I don't know if it ever arrived. And now I've not got it either. It was an absolute peach. So if anyone's got a Japanese Caterpillar hat, then well done to you. Ken Hatter is here. Proper mixed bag. He's got the sun and he's got the chili. Bit like that here, actually. Very cold last night, I have to say. Talk of that, I think I have the old logo one. Do you? Excuse me. A piece of toast, maybe. Good morning to everybody that's here. You have the old logo. Fantastic stuff. Was that the Mitsubishi Cat Factory? It was. It absolutely was. It was a memorable trip. Bored you with all that before, and there is a book about it. I can't remember what I called it, but there is. If you go over to buymeacoffee.com/demolition news, you can get a copy of the book that I wrote as a result of that trip to Japan. But yes, it was the Mitsubishi factory. We on one day we went to see them demolishing the old Caterpillar track tractor, the little dozers. I think it was the D3, D4, and that kind of model. They used to build them in one factory, and that was being demolished to make way for something else. But then we actually went to the factory to see the Cat 340 straight boom demolition excavator, which hadn't actually been launched at that point. It was parked outside, and parked right beside it was another machine that had the wrong boom, the wrong cab, and the wrong undercarriage. So I was politely asked, do us a favor and don't publish that because it's not actually a finished model. Turns out the thing that we were looking at was actually the 352 straight boom, which would follow about a year later. But yes, it was the old Mitsubishi factory. Gary Muirhead says, do you think it's time for Lord Bamford to hand the control over to someone else and he can finally retire? He's definitely earned it. He has earned it. Listen, he's got plenty of money in the bank. JCB is doing quite nicely, and all of those things. But the last 2 or 3 times I've seen him, I don't get the impression he's one for slowing down. He's every bit as up and as, what's the word, vital. He's still got that drive and that energy. And I mean, I'm going back a few years. What was it, 6, 7 years ago? The Hydra Dig was launched, and he was in attendance because apparently it had been one of his babies for the launch of the Hydra Dig. And he was like a kid in a candy store. He has the opportunity to see all of that every single day of his life, and yet he was still completely enthused. I think the time will come. And I do think they've done a very good job of putting the succession in place. I think George and Joe are more than equipped to take it forward and everything else. But why would you let go while you're still enjoying it? Assuming he may not be enjoying it, but he certainly looks like a man who is. Ken says it's his company. He wants to keep it. I'm sure he does. Dan is still having trouble with the Cat 330 operator, who is all over the place apparently. I wonder if he's actually listening to this show, and I wonder if he knows. If anybody is driving a Cat 330 right about now, and you feel like you're being a bit erratic, maybe Dan's talking about you. Maybe. The Caterpillar demo guy was out yesterday and asked, did I get my Caterpillar backpack with the goodies? I said no, so hopefully he can still get me one. Good. I mean, I know the fine folks at Volvo have looked after you very well in the past. I know Steel Wrist still look after you very well. That time Caterpillar did the same. Yeah, Caterpillar backpack. Oh no, I've cleared out this office actually. There is one here. And it's a really nice bag, but it's quite strange. It's you know that notion of the TARDIS on Doctor Who, where it's small on the outside, huge inside. My Caterpillar backpack is the complete inverse of that. It's quite a big backpack, it's quite tall and it's quite wide and it's quite deep. You can get absolutely fuck all in it. There's a lot of padding. Anything you put in it is very, very well protected. I'll give it that. But I can get a little camera and a pair of underpants in there, and that's it. I'm about done at that point. So yeah, but look forward to that. Listen, it's Caterpillar. It's very well made. I'm sure you'll love it. Should we crack on? I think we should. We've been talking about Mr. Bamford, or Lord Bamford. Let's hear from him. 50 years at the tiller of JCB. That's a life lived, isn't it? Kings and queens, princes, princesses, global leaders, the good, the bad, and Boris Johnson. Unbelievable. Dan saying he met all of the prime ministers, almost. Did anyone spot like Tony Blair in there or Gordon Brown? I mean, I'm sure they must have done, but I think Lord Bamford wears his political leanings on his sleeve. So but there they will. But Gary Muirhead says must be the only video of a father and son together. I have seen a couple of clips elsewhere. May need to dig those out. Ken Hatcher says good video. That Georgina Williams in the last clip. I didn't spot it, but I was trying to upload a video at the time. Love that they say JCB World headquarters when you visit them. Yeah, and it is. It absolutely is. Amazing. A feat in itself on how far they've come. Yeah, listen, I could bore you all and probably will do. Joe Bamford was the visionary. He was the maverick. He was the rebel. He was the innovator. But he only took it so far. And where it's come in the last 50 years under Lord Bamford, astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. The bottom line is JCB needs to keep selling to bring in the money. And they do it pretty damn well, I have to say. Good that it's still a British brand. So many have been brought out by foreign investors. Yeah, I think that's one of the great benefits of being a family-owned company. I think if it were down to shareholders, at some point, somewhere along the line, somebody may have had a sniff around JCB, but being a family concern, they don't have to trouble themselves with such things. Did you look at the group during the video, Mark? I didn't. Should I have done? Oh, see, that's been sent to me by Mr. McKenna. It's very smart. It's not the original, though. It's not the original cat logo. If anybody remembers, you may go and have a look. Andy Thornton, yes, you have, Mr. Girls, and there were many of them today, even more than usual, and exceptionally voluptuous. And well, what can I tell you? If you snooze, you lose around these parts. A brand that Britain can be built, can be proud of. I totally agree. And Ken Hatcher saying it's a private company. If it wasn't, it'd be foreign by now. He's protected it. Yes, he has. Yes, he has. And fair play to him for it. I wonder if anybody has ever actually had a sniff around that. I wonder if maybe a Caterpillar or a Komatsu have thought, fancy a piece of that. I wonder if that's ever happened over the years, whether they've been tapped up over the years. I wonder. Will we ever know? Probably not. We've got more to bring you. Wacker. Wacker have got a new mini excavator, electric variety. I'll show it to you I'll show it to you now, actually. That's probably the best bet.
The emission-free mini excavator EZ10E. Compact, powerful, and entirely free of emissions. Engineered for applications where every inch counts. The telescopic travel gear and adjustable armrests make it perfect for narrow passages and precise work. In stationary grid operation, it remains ready for use at all times and can continue working while charging. Ergonomically designed down to the last detail, the comfort seat and modern control system ensure pleasant and intuitive operation. And when endurance is key, the EZ10E is quick and easy to charge, ready for a full working day of performance. Experience the future of emission-free construction. Test it now at your Wacker Neuson sales partner.
Right, lots of stuff to get through. Gary Muirhead sarcastically saying only 3p per tax an hour to operate. I wonder, given all that happened with the budget, and I mean, do we actually know where we stand on plant and equipment? I know where we stand on vehicles. Do we know where we stand on equipment yet? But I do wonder if we'll see a bit of a backlash on that. Andy Thornton, that's something I can use in my back garden. I'll have a word with Wacker on your behalf if you wish. Dan Cullen, also, like a child, like a small child, because I was chuckling too when they said it was ideal for narrow passages. Dan, grow up, and I'll try to do the same, but well done. Jim says, reckon I've got an original black cat cap with yellow sewn on the cap badge. Now, according to Barlow World, according to Peter McKenna, according to Barlow World, that is the original logo from 1963. That's the first hat they produced. Okay, that may well be the case. What I was getting at, bear with me for 1 second. I do have the ability to do this. I just got to remember how. There we are. I was talking about the original logo, which is the one back from 1925. You see the kind of wavy one, which I guess is trying to portray the as Peter says. The first cat logo looked like a caterpillar. Yes, it did. That was precisely what they were trying to do. If I could get myself a hat with one of those on there, I do think that picture has missed a few iterations. I remember what they're listing there as the 1967, with that weird C in the box. And obviously we saw the switch over to that weird yellow triangle, which I never entirely understood. And obviously we now have the modern cat logo. But yeah, listen, I don't think there's much wrong with that. But if there is one of those caps with the original on there out there, I wouldn't mind one of those. I'm not saying you buy it for me. Listen, just send me the details and I'll go and find it. Next video. I'll tell you in a sec. Let's play this
If
first.
you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Yeah, the video I'm about to play you, I found it yesterday and I thought I could do with some music on it. So I dropped it into my movie editor and I put some music on it. And I actually sat back and thought, do you know what? That actually sounds better without the music, because then you get to hear the sound of the site. So that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a sound of the site. Here we are. This is Engcon. There you are, the sound of Engcon. What do we have next? Oh, I know what we have next. We have a bit of this.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Yeah, we're still tapping the rich vein of conversation that is the Caterpillar hat. Jim says, mine has the 1967 logo and cat diesel power. Smart. Peter says, looks like the easiest way is to have one embroidered onto a cap yourself, Mark. It's not the same, though, is it? It's not. I mean, you could do that, I suppose, but it's not. It's not. I've got. Does anyone remember? I had a red, like a weathered red baseball cap when we first started doing these shows. That had streamer written across the front of it, which I've still got. It's still here somewhere. In fact, I know exactly where it is. But it had been deliberately aged. It had been dyed kind of a maroony reddy colour and then deliberately aged, which was fine, but false. It's the same as I've got. I mentioned this yesterday. I've got a Carhartt jacket that I bought in a thrift store in America when I was over in Louisville. Spots of oil on it. It's not exactly in perfect condition, but man alive, it looks better for it. Maybe I will display it for you sometime. I don't know why you want to see my jacket, but you never know. I've thrown myself completely out of sync today. So really and truly, I should be going to the final film, but because I've done things out of order, I'm going to throw in an extra one. So rather than going to the final film, we're going to go for a bit of Chinese. Yeah, a bit of Chinese, which means we'll be fancying another one in about an hour's time. Go back to the chat. Dan Cullen says, older caps are great. I sent Nigel an old cat cap with diesel power on it. Lucky man. Lucky man. I used to have one of those. I think I got one in Malaga, actually, back in the late 80s, which I wore for years. I gave a bunch of my cat hats to my dad. No idea what happened to those after his sad and premature demise, but yeah. I was planning to swap out the film that I'm about, well, not the film, the advert that I'm about to play you, because it leaves me feeling slightly uncomfortable. I didn't design her. I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again. I did not design the look of the lady in the ad I'm about to play you. She is AI. She is not real. She is not. She's kind of my making, but I just said attractive blonde woman, bookshop. I've got a funny feeling that the AI that I used mistook the word book for the word boob. It's one letter out, and it makes all the difference, as you're about to see.
Visit buymeacoffee.com/demolition news www.livestream.com/extras. It will put a smile on your face.
Yeah, there you are. The details of the bookstore are in the chat right there. It is 95%, probably even 98% free. If you're looking for something to read now or over the Christmas break, you know where to go. buymeacoffee.com/demolition news/extras. All of which brings us to our final film. We were talking earlier about the Wacker machine and about the potential cost per hour being taxed and so on down the line. Electric machines kind of open up a whole new conversation. And part of that conversation is imagine your mini excavator is actually your power charger. Imagine that. I've got two stories on that. Imagine that. I need to charge my phone. You bring out your mini excavator. I was watching a very small clip of Graham Norton. He was on an American talk show. For once, he was the guest rather than the host, and he was being asked about guests that he had that had been awkward. He wouldn't name names, although he did admit that it was a woman that he was talking about. Apparently, in advance of appearing on the Graham Norton show, they were advised that this person would require not one, not two, but nine dressing rooms. And on the day this major celebrity, was due to arrive, there was a panic to say, actually, we need another changing room. And when they were asked, why do you need a 10th changing room? She needs somewhere to charge her phone. True story. True story. Now, Gary says, do you have any of your books in audio format? Do you know that's a good? There are some audio books over on there. Not all of them. Not all of them. You've got me thinking now. I wonder if I could do something about that. Let me look into that, Gary. I'll come back to you. Meg Ryan was an arse on his show, I think. Yes, she was. You used to have a bit of a thing for Meg Ryan back in the day. That kind of took some of the polish off it. But yeah, didn't she? I don't think I'm talking out of turn. Didn't she have some issues with the booze? Seem to remember. Going back to our young lady who advertised our bookstore. The fact that we now say things like, I didn't design her, is very weird science. Oh, Kelly LeBrock. Who remembers Kelly LeBrock? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just taking a moment. Kelly LeBrock, back in the 80s. She is one. If she was in my bed, I wouldn't kick her out. Glasses make some women hot. They do. They do. I have to say, in my formative years, I had a bit of a thing for ladies with glasses. Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I do have a bit of a thing for ladies with glasses. In actual fact, but given that she's beyond the wall, I do remember being on holiday with my mate when we were about 17 years old, and there were two girls at the bar, and they'd had a look, we'd had a look. It was clear that we were about to have a chat, shall we say. And on the way over, my mate Bruce said, "Which one do you fancy?" And I went, "Definitely the one in the glasses." Yeah. Listen, glasses. Meg Ryan never revved me up. Rosamund Pike is my pin-up, says Jim. Yeah, Jim, I can see that. I think Rosamund Pike has got a bit of the Joanna Lumleys about her, hasn't she? I think it's the poshness. Maybe it's not the poshness that does it for you, but it's the poshness that does it for me. I can see that entirely. Helena Bonham Carter for much the same reason. That and the fact that she looks a bit like a bag lady. I'm not saying I particularly like bag ladies, but you get the idea with Helena Bonham Carter. Bit of a fan. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up the main part of this morning show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle-like over into my morning monologue. If you can't stick around for that, please stay safe, look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. I hope to see you again very soon. Dan, I hope your man on your 3:30 behaves himself. And after you've listened to what I'm about to tell you, maybe think about how you spend some of your time. I'll come back to it, but morning monologue time coming up now. I didn't learn to swim until I was 14 years old. Throughout my childhood, I had a recurring nightmare of drowning. I saw the movie Jaws when I was way too young, and it left me with a lifelong fear of sharks. And those two factors explain why I seldom venture into the sea. And it also explains why loneliness is so terrifying. I can avoid water and the creatures that live in it, but loneliness can strike at any time. It's waiting in your house. It can lurk among crowds, and you can't outrun it. And that's why loneliness is my greatest single fear. It's easy to dismiss this as mere pre-Christmas melancholy or a bit of a low mood, but the reality is far more brutal. We're looking at a killer that sits on par with smoking or obesity. Research suggests it ramps up your mortality risk by 27%. It's linked to heart disease, stroke, and biological markers for Alzheimer's. Yet it's not a virus or a toxin. It's not something you can catch from human contact. In fact, it's born from the precise opposite: a lack of human touch, a starvation of connection. And loneliness is quite simply an epidemic. We're living in a strange time. We've never been more connected in the technological sense. We're globally wired, plugged into a 24-hour cycle of digital noise. Yet the warmth of actual human contact is receding. We're automating the humanity out of our lives. We shop online, we work remotely, and we substitute real conversation for the sanitized distance of a text message. Our social fabric is fraying. But if you look closely at the threads that are snapping first, you'll often find that they belong to men. Loneliness doesn't discriminate, it comes for everyone. But for men, there is a specific cultural trapdoor. We're raised on a diet of stoicism and invulnerability. To admit you're lonely feels like an admission of failure, feels like you're saying you're not man enough to handle your own business. So we battle on with a sort of bravado, masking the silence with noise or quite often with alcohol. We also tend to put all of our emotional eggs in one basket. Men rely heavily on their partners for social support. We often don't have the sprawling safety nets of friends that women tend to cultivate. And if that relationship breaks down or if bereavement strikes, the isolation can be absolute. I want to talk about a specific group of men who are right at the sharp end of this, the lads in demolition and construction. If you designed a laboratory experiment to create loneliness, it would look a lot like a modern demolition site. These are industries defined by transience. You go where the work is. That often means migrating away from home, leaving your mates and your family behind. You're effectively pulling up your roots every few months. And then there's the work itself. You might be surrounded by people, but are you connecting? Probably not. Teams shift and change constantly. You don't get the time to build that deep trust of true friendship. Consider the machine operator. He's sitting in a cab doing highly skilled work, but he basically spends his entire life in a sound suppressed box. Often the only sound they can hear are their own thoughts. And if those thoughts are dark, if they're worried about money or a divorce, that cab becomes an echo chamber for rumination. It's a physical manifestation of isolation. We all had a taste of this, didn't we? The COVID-19 pandemic was a global lesson in what happens when you turn off the tap of human interaction. We felt the routines vanish. We felt the worries build up because there was no one to distract us. But there was a fascinating nuance there as well. Some men coped surprisingly well. Why? Because they felt they had a purpose. If they were isolating to protect the family or the NHS, that solitude had a mission attached to it. It bestowed a sense of social worth. It proved that men can handle. Sorry. It proved that men can handle solitude, provided they feel they're serving a purpose. The relief we felt when things opened up again wasn't just about going to the pub, it was about the restoration of our capacity to connect through activity. So, how do we fix this? We know from everything we've said about mental health, we can't just tell men to talk more. That ignores the fundamental way that men operate. Sitting in a circle and staring at each other, discussing our feelings, might work for some, but for many, it's excruciating. We don't do face to face. Men connect shoulder to shoulder. We connect by doing things together. If we want to stop this silent epidemic, particularly in industries like demolition and construction, we need a structural shift. We need to treat social connection with the same seriousness as we treat physical health and safety. As a nation, we need to invest in our third spaces, places that aren't at home and not work, and ideally they're not the pub either. We're talking about the clubs, the community centres, the sports ground. These are the places where the safety nets are woven. And when we lose them, we lose the ability to catch people before they fall. And we also need to change the narrative. We need to dismantle the stigma that says man has to be a solitary island to be strong. Real strength isn't about suffering in silence. We have to move beyond treating loneliness as an individual failing. It's not your fault if you're lonely. It's a design flaw in the way we live and work. For the construction worker, for the retiree, for the man sitting in his house wondering why the phone never rings, we need to rebuild the foundations. We need to create spaces where men can find purpose, earn their self-worth, and engage in the splendidly pointless pastime of just hanging out. We just have to be brave enough to admit that we need each other. Now, a couple of things before I get into the chat. We live in a very strange time. I said about this idea of being always on, always connected. You know, the very fact that I'm talking to you over the interwebs kind of proves that point. You've got 24-hour bombardment by news. You can find any piece of information you could ever want. You do your shopping online. You know, you're talking to people on social media, text messages, WhatsApp messages, and yet by and large we are all very, very disconnected. And one of the things that really struck me with this when I was kind of pulling the research together for this was up until, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, up until the mid-80s, if you went out during the day, you'd go down your local high street or to your local shopping area, or you'd go to work, or you'd go to the pub, or you'd go to the football, and you were open to the world. You were open to conversations. I mean, even things like, chatting to the person in front of you or behind you in the queue at the checkout in the supermarket. You were open to that communication. Now, you find that a lot of people are walking up and down the high street. They're at the football. I've seen that at the football. And they're also in supermarket checkout queues with the little white AirPods in their ears. I think it began with the Sony Walkman back in the mid-80s. But for the whole of human history, we were always open to interaction, to conversation, to the back and forth of human existence. And at some point in the mid-80s, we went, "Nah, sod that. I'll shut myself off." To the point where I think we've developed a kind of a new way of looking at people. Sometimes something happens in the checkout at your supermarket, and you think, I've got something funny to say about that. And you look at the person in front who experienced the same thing, and you see the little dangly white ear, and you think, well, I'm not going to tap him on the shoulder and say, "Take him out. I've got a funny to tell you." So you let it slide. And I walking around things like, you walk around Balmer or you walk around ConExpo, and the number of people that are, they're probably listening to music or a podcast or whatever it might be, but they're there, but they're tuned out. Going back to the operators, and I will go over to the chat in just a moment. Going back to what I was saying about the industry itself, we have amongst us a bunch of equipment operators. Let me ask you something. How often do you get out of your cab for lunch or for a mid-morning snack or for a cup of coffee? What I'm getting at, I guess, is how often during a working day are you open to human interaction? You might work with 5, 10, 20, 40 people. How often do you speak to them? Do you know their wife's name or their girlfriend's name? Do you know if they've got kids? Do you know what football team they support? Do you know where they live? Do you know what they do at weekends? I'd love to hear from you on that. The other one that occurred to me, when you go to Spain, France, Italy in particular, I would say, but also anywhere in the Middle East, you'll find groups of men usually sat in the sunshine, which they have the benefit we don't, but they sit in the sunshine, drinking coffee and chatting. I do remember when we did our Mediterranean cruise back in August, I think it was. We stopped off. One of the ports of call was in Sicily, and there were, I guess, 4 or 5 guys, all Sicilian, all sat around a table. And at one point, a guy walked past, and he literally had a ladder on his shoulder. He had overalls on, covered in paint, clearly a painter or a decorator. And they shouted over to him, and he came over, and he propped his ladder up by the wall, ordered himself a cup of coffee. He was at work and decided, nah, I'm going to have a chat with my mates. Do we do that? Do we ever do that? Think about when you're traveling on a train or a tube. When was the last time you actually struck up a conversation with somebody? Weird, right? And I mentioned this idea of third spaces and, places where, blokes can just hang out and have a chat. And when I first started writing this, I'll be honest with you, I was actually toying with the idea of doing a non-specific evening show. Not video based, not specifically even demolition and construction based. Just switch on one evening a week or one evening a month and just, I'll get everybody to pop up on screen, and we'll all just have a natter about whatever's bothering us or making us laugh at a particular time. And I quickly shot that down in flames because that kind of doesn't fix anything. There's still no human contact. I mean, I look forward to these shows. I look forward to having a chat with people that I consider to be my friends and my mates now. But it's not actually a substitute for sitting around with a cup of coffee or a pint or a cup of tea or whatever it might be, and just chewing the fat. No predetermined goal. We're going to talk about this, and then you can have your say, and then I'll have my say. Just the way that conversation works. Somebody says something, and it does happen on this show. I know it happens on this show. We had a show the other day where we ended up talking about children's TV shows from our childhood, and I've no idea how we got there, but that happens very, very naturally face to face. It happens kind of unnaturally in this environment, and I wonder, and I kind of wrote that for myself because, as I say, it is my greatest fear, and I do know that I spend way too much time in my own company. And anyone that's met me will tell you I'm a boring arsehole generally. And so the last person I want to be trapped with is this guy. And I don't think I'm alone. I don't think I'm alone. Let's have a look. Let's see what we've got in the chat. Lots of comments over there. Let's see what they've got to say. Jim Turner saying, Penelope Keith in The Good Life for Posh Totty. Lumley still revs me up. Penelope Keith never really did it, but Felicity Kendall. Being in a cab all day on my own is my idea of heaven, says Jim. I operate the machine on autopilot without much thought, so it leaves my mind plenty of time to ponder, plan, and work out all the other things in life. I think you're fortunate in that. I think you're fortunate in that. I don't like to be left with my thoughts for too long. I have a nasty habit of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Oh, but there's that negative thing, and I am a bit of a worrier. But I'll be the first to admit I'm not a person with the average attitude. What is the average attitude? He says, and my tism makes me cold, unfailing, and not needing validation from other people. I'm not entirely sure that it. With me, I don't think it's a validation. I mean, I really have cut myself off, and I don't know how I keep falling for it. When I left school with dozens of mates. I was in the school football team and the school cricket team, and I wouldn't say I was, I wasn't the star of the school, but I was a pretty popular guy. Loads of friends, male and female. I left school and kind of got it into my head that keeping up those friendships was down to others. And I almost, I don't say I wouldn't go so far as to say I consciously thought it, but subconsciously thought, well, if they really want to be my friend, they'll catch up with me. I'm not going to do all the running around. And a couple of years later, you find yourself with, what started out as 20, 30, 40 mates is 2. And when one dies and one moves to the other end of the country, you're kind of screwed, aren't you? And I've done it again, and I wouldn't say this is why I set out to do it. We were talking yesterday about Mavericks and Rebels and stuff like that. When I was cut loose and allowed to pursue my own my career on the trajectory that I wanted to do it, I didn't want to be the fawning influencer stroke journalist who, just agreed with everything that manufacturers and federations and institutes were saying. I wanted to be able to voice my own opinion. There's a double-edged sword there. I'd like to think that my work, particularly my written work, has commanded some degree of respect, but it's also isolated me in quite a big way. To the point, and it's such a tiny thing, but I was so impressed by it when I went to Paul Brown's funeral the other day, last Friday. I arrived. There was a group of people milling around, and I'm not, as I say, I'm not the guy to go and start making conversation. So I kind of hung back a bit. And William Sinclair from SafeDem, who was actually one of the people giving a eulogy, came over, so put his arm around my shoulder. Come on, Mark, you're among friends here. And some of the people that I was then alongside were people, I wouldn't say I'd had a go at them, but I'm fairly sure there was a few people weren't particularly pleased to see me, but he basically bridged that gap. He brought me in. Maybe I could do with him follow me around all the time. But yeah, as I say, my own personal attitude and the way I've pursued my journalistic career has isolated me, and yet it is my greatest fear. It is my greatest fear of actually being lonely. And I've said this before. Well, here we are. Dan's actually said it for me. Another thing, you can still be lonely even when you're with people or at work. You don't get into a proper conversation. You're right. You're right. I mean, I've found myself at events before now, 100, 200, 400 people all gathered in a room. And I felt like it was almost like I was literally going back to, Simon and Garfunkel, I am a rock, I am an island. I am here. Everybody is mixing with everybody else. And I'm in a little pocket on my own. It's not true. I wasn't having an out-of-body experience looking down on this one isolated person. That never happened. But in my head, it was like, everybody's getting on with everybody and I'm not, which I'm sure is largely I am to blame for that. But I don't think I'm alone. Andy has had a few issues with sound, but he's back. And he also says loneliness isn't about solitude. No, it's not. It's about disconnection. It's the distress that comes from feeling isolated, even when others are physically present. Yeah, when I wrote this article, I think I've got a tagline on it. I can't remember 'cause I wrote it a few days ago. Um, I had a tagline which was disconnected in a connected world. You know, the very fact that I can speak to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people by text message, WhatsApp message, email, whatever it might be. When was the last time you picked one of those things up and actually phoned someone? I don't suppose I'm unique in that. When I had a message the other day from a guy on LinkedIn who said, got an idea for you, we need to chat. So I went back and I said, whenever you're ready. He's got my phone number and I've got his phone number, but I haven't picked up the phone. I've sent him a LinkedIn message and I've sent him a text message, and at some point today I may well send him an email, but at no point have I picked up the phone. So we have all of those means of connection, and yet we are deeply disconnected. And one of the things that I find really hard to get my head around is I hate to say this, but I actually thoroughly enjoyed lockdown. I wish it hadn't been accompanied with as many deaths as it was. But actually, but me being forced to be in a house with my nearest and dearest, brilliant. Me, wife, kids, dogs, happy days. Happy days. I was as happy as Larry. The bit that really struck me was when we opened up again and everybody was just so eager to meet up. We'll have a barbecue. We'll do this. We'll go here. We'll do these things. We saw up close what isolation really, really felt like. And yet, when we came out the other end, I seriously feel like the world, rather than opening up and being more outgoing and more connected, we actually went, oh no, two people out there. I think I'll stay where I am. Some sites I've been on feel the same, even though we have a conversation, but it's down to no connection. Yeah. I do think, and this is only something that I happened upon. I'd never even heard the expression before until I started to write that article. This idea of third spaces. Somewhere that isn't work, that isn't home, it's somewhere else, somewhere where you can meet and interact. Obviously, the pub is not necessarily the ideal world, because if you are a particularly sort of lonely person, there is obviously the temptation to seek solace in a pint or something far more strong than that. But I was also thinking now, and I can't believe I'm going to suggest this, but I do think it's an important point. There was a time in my lifetime there was a time in my life when there were fixed places to hang out. The pub was one and church was another. Now, I did quite a bit of hanging out in pubs, never did the church thing. But both of those had that kind of community feel, didn't they? If you went to church, by and large, you saw the same people week in, week out. You got to know them. You got to know their wife and their children and where they lived and what they liked and what they didn't like, because there was kind of a two-way conversation. There was also a shared experience. If you are Catholic, Christian, whatever it might be, you have that. You bring that to the party. It's already taken down some of the walls between us. I don't think that happens anymore. I don't think the church or the pub are the centre of community anymore. In fact, I'm thinking about my local area here. I'm not entirely sure. Now, bearing in mind, I mean, I live in a cul-de-sac. There's probably 50 houses out the front here. Beyond that, there's probably another couple of hundred houses, way over there. There's a little row of shops as well, and all of that kind of thing. I don't think we have a hub. There's a couple of there's a there's a cafe, there's a couple of restaurants, there's a bar, there's a pub. But I've lived here like 5.5 years or thereabouts, maybe 6 years, and there isn't like a central place. I mean, if I on the occasions I decide I fancy a bacon roll or something, I take myself off to the cafe, have a bacon roll and a cup of tea. I normally do it with a newspaper or sat there scrolling through my phone. Don't talk to anyone. Weird, right? Demo Mike over on Instagram, who's just told me I'm a loser. It's guys like you, fuckwit. Well, cheers for that, Mike. I hope you have a fantastic day, mate. Dan says, this is why I like listening to music in my own space. I'm happiest. I like music. I really do. I work with music on, and I have music on in the car and stuff. Is it really a substitute for actual human interaction? I don't think it is. Gary says you could be in a room full of people and still feel alone. I've been there and I've done that. I've got the T-shirt for it as well. I can easily get having the crack with total strangers if we have a common link, but I don't speak to anyone all day whilst at a place with thousands of people. Doesn't bother me. Again, listen, I mean, I try to write these monologues and do these shows for the wider audience, but ultimately a bit of me will filter through, and maybe a lot of what I've said today is me. Maybe I am just an unsociable git. I'm that awful mix of I don't like mixing with people, but I hate not being with people. I've brought it on myself, perhaps, but I do. I mean, I've done the research. We are literally talking about a global epidemic. The people worst affected by loneliness are men, and the people that are worst of the worst are younger men. Yeah. And I was particularly taken, having seen the effect that bereavement had on my dad and then subsequently on my wife's mum. That putting all your eggs in one basket, which, I guess that's part of, marriage or relationships or whatever. My best mate is my wife. I spend more time with her than I spend with anybody else. If something happened to her, I mean, I'm not exactly the most sociable guy now, but if she were to pop her clogs, I'd be fucked. I really would. Because even when we go out, we went out for a meal a couple of weeks back, if we're going out with other people, it's always her people. It's the people that she went to school with and their husbands or whatever it might be. I don't do anything. Jim says I can be in a foreign country and take myself off on my own without being able to communicate and be totally at ease with my own company. Most of the time I am at ease with my own company. I think I notice it worse. Not when I'm depressed. I mean, I know what that feels like. When when I've got a lot on my mind, when I've got things that are concerning me for one reason or another, I do find myself. I mean, I'm fairly withdrawn anyway, but I withdraw even more. And after a couple of days or maybe a week of that, I do start to think, yeah, I've really backed myself into a corner here. Let's have a look what Dan say here. Dan says, I'm the same. Sometimes I've great thinking when in a coffee shop, watching people move around around me, move around. I love people watching. I do love people watching. Do you know what? I'm only thinking of this while I'm doing it. If you go, okay, let me take you back. When me and Fred were in Louisville, in Kentucky, we went to a diner one night. He loves diner type food, so we went to a diner and walked in, and we're sat on like a long table, like a bit of a communal kind of thing, and people sat down next to us and just struck up conversation, which is quite an American thing to do. And once you've broken the ice, or once they've broken the ice, and where you're from, oh, you're from the UK, you know the Queen, or all of that old tosh that you get. It's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. We don't do that here, and I wonder if part of it is kind of an unspoken nervousness, particularly when you're talking male to female. We've had this thing over the last few years of if you hold a door open for a woman, you those of a certain age will think, "Oh, gentleman," and those of a younger age perhaps might think, "Sex is pig." I also wonder if there's a degree of that, not necessarily with the women, but more the men. You're in a supermarket, there's a woman in front of you, you have something to say that, you might wanna tell her something, or you might have a joke to impart, or, a funny comment or whatever it might be, but you kinda hold back because you don't wanna be that guy. You don't wanna be the bloke talking to the woman in case she takes it the wrong way. And, again, I'm not entirely sure if that's a real thing, or whether us men, being the weirdos that we are, have thought, "Yeah, that could be misconstrued. I better bite my tongue." This isn't a conversation thing. For some years, while my former business partner was still alive, we had an office down in Tenterden in Kent, which is about an hour's drive from where I'm sat right now. And about once a week, sometimes once a fortnight, I used to take a spin down there, and we'd have a day in the office together, plan out what we were doing. You do that, I'll do that. We'll meet back in the middle, all that kind of thing. So I used to spend an hour there, hour back, M25, M20, and so on. I was coming back one evening up the M20, and there was, I wouldn't even go so far as to say a young woman. She was younger than me, but there was a woman by the side of the road with a broken down car, and I saw her, and I saw her vehicle, and I immediately applied the brakes, and I thought, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to restart a car. I'm not a mechanic. I couldn't even change a spark plug. I'm useless. But I started to slow down, and then something in my head went, "Ah, but what if? What if she is just the front and her boyfriend is there waiting to whack me over the head and steal my phone or my car or both?" And I also thought in the back of my head, what if I stop, try to help, and she then cries sexual assault, even though I'm completely innocent? So I took my foot off the brake, put my foot back on the accelerator, and carried on. How weird is that? When I lived at the house before last, we were the first people on the housing development. Gradually filled up, but we didn't have a bus service into our local town. So I proposed at a residents' association meeting, why don't we have like a carpool? So, there was only two ways in and out of our housing development. There was one that went kind of away from the town, and one that went into the town. I said, why don't we just, if you see somebody walking, just pull over and say, I'm part of the carpool, jump in. And what I found strange with that, none of the women present, and there was actually more women there than there were men, none of the women said, "I'm not getting in a stranger's car." But half a dozen or so of the men went, I wouldn't pick up a lone female just in case she cries rape. And these are, or these were, when I lived there, these were our next door neighbours. These were people that we would see up and down the road. We knew where they lived. We knew who their kids were, but a group of men said we wouldn't pick up. And it wasn't, we weren't, this wasn't going to be a carpool purely for hot women. It was going to be a carpool. I'm driving into Epsom. Do you want a lift? That was all it was. And the men immediately went on the defensive and, oh, no, couldn't do that. How weird is that? You go to the Netherlands, outskirts of Amsterdam, because they have a charge. They have a like almost like our congestion charge, but you get charged less if there's more than one person in your car. So they actually have carpool bus stops. So you pull over, random strangers get in your car, you drive, they get a free ride, you get into the centre of Amsterdam for less money. Everyone's a winner. But over here, no. We do that up in our part of the world. I do find the further north you go, the more likely you are to have that random conversation. And I mean, it's very easy for me to point fingers. I love Italians. All virtually every Italian I've ever met has been fantastic. But in Rome, they're quite rude. Probably because there's so many of us there. And they're pissed off with it. I get on quite well with the French, despite the fact that I make jokes about it. I get on quite well with the French. But Parisians, by and large, are rude. And despite the fact that I'm one of them, I've got a funny feeling that Londoners are the same. I think we're so cheesed off with trying to go out about our day-to-day business and tripping over national and international tourists that we just I wish they'd all piss off and go home. And I know down in parts of Devon and Cornwall, what do they call us? Grockles or whatever it might be. The visitors to, they want our money, but they don't particularly want us there. Whereas if you go to, I've always found Birmingham quite a friendly place, but you go up to Newcastle, Manchester, Leeds, up places like that, by and large, you do find yourself striking up a conversation. I remember once being in a bar in Cairo, as you do, and I'm sat at the bar, and I'd taken a paper back because that's the kind of guy I am. Guy sat down beside me, and he turns out he was American, and I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from Georgia." I said, "Well, funnily enough," I said, "my eldest daughter is called Georgia." And that was it. That was me and him for the rest of the evening. We just sat there and chewed the fat. But he instigated it because I'm weird and British. I'm forever lonely. Weird, right? Anywho, people, I already know what tomorrow's subject is, but I can't really explain it. It's our inability, or more specifically, our unwillingness to give things time. It will make sense, probably, by the time we get there. But it's going to be an interesting conversation. So, people, if you are around tomorrow at 10 a.m., I hope to see you there. Andy Thornton, don't forget that the free money and the dancing girls do start at around about 10 o'clock. So you need to be there, or you'll miss all the fun and games. I will try my level best to come up with a new young lady for our bookstore advert, because I do feel like that one's inappropriate. But between now and then, everybody have a fantastic day. Thank you for your company. On the subject of loneliness, thank you for getting me through another morning of my lonely existence. I'm off to have a chat with the family, actually, so don't take any notice of that. But I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, everybody, have a good one. All the best.